He was not tall. He was not born into power. He did not come from a rich family. But he changed the entire world. He fought his way from a small island to the greatest throne in Europe. He failed many times. He was laughed at. He was told he was not good enough. But he never stopped. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who believed that impossible was just a word, a man who proved that your origin does not decide your destiny. Let us go back in time. Let us go to a small island in the Mediterranean Sea. The year is 1769. The island is called Corsica. It is a beautiful island, but it is poor, and it is far from the centers of power in Europe. On August 15, 1769, a baby boy was born. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. His family was not rich, but they were proud. His father, Carlo, was a lawyer. His mother, Letizia, was a strong and determined woman. She raised 8 children, and she raised them with discipline, love, and fire. From the very beginning, Napoleon was different. He was small. Other children teased him about his size, but his eyes were sharp. His mind was always working. He asked questions all the time. He read everything he could find. He was hungry, not just for food. He was hungry for knowledge, for power, for something bigger than Corsica. When Napoleon was 9 years old, his father made a decision. He decided to send Napoleon to school in France. It was a big moment. Napoleon did not speak French well. He spoke Corsican. He spoke Italian. France was a foreign country to him. It was strange. It was far. It was frightening. Napoleon arrived at school in Autun, France. The other children laughed at him. His French was poor. His accent was heavy. He was small. He dressed differently. He was an outsider, a foreigner. Look at the little Corsican, the other boys said. He cannot even speak French properly. Napoleon did not cry. He did not run home. He held his chin up. He watched the other boys. He studied them. And he studied his books. He worked twice as hard as everyone else. He learned French faster than anyone expected. And soon the laughing stopped. He was moved to a military school in Brienne. This school was for boys who would become soldiers. It was strict. It was hard. The days were long and the nights were cold. But Napoleon loved it. He found his place here. He was not the strongest boy. He was not the biggest, but he was the smartest. He loved mathematics. He loved history. He read about great military leaders of the past. He read about Alexander the Great. He read about Julius Caesar. He read about Hannibal. These men became his teachers, not in person but through books. Napoleon read their stories and he learned from their victories and their mistakes. One winter, the boys at school had a snowball fight. It sounds like a simple game, but Napoleon turned it into something more. He organized his side. He gave everyone a role. He built strategy. He commanded like a real general, and his side won. The teachers watched in amazement. That boy thinks differently, one teacher said. He is not just playing, he is planning. Napoleon finished school and moved to the prestigious Paris Military Academy. He was 15 years old. He was still small. He was still poor. Many of the other students came from noble families. They had money. They had connections. Napoleon had none of these things. But he had something more powerful. He had ambition and he had focus. He studied military strategy every single day. He stayed up late reading. He woke up early preparing. He graduated in 1 year, a course that normally took 2 years. He was ready. He became a junior officer in the French army at 16. The pay was small. The work was hard. But Napoleon did not complain. He watched. He learned. He waited for his moment. And then France changed everything. In 1789, the French Revolution began. The people of France rose up against the king, against the rich, against the unfair system. It was a time of chaos and danger. But for Napoleon, it was also a time of opportunity. France needed soldiers. France needed leaders. Napoleon stepped forward. He showed his talent for the first time at a place called Toulon. A French port city had been taken over by enemies. The British were helping them. The French army was struggling. Nothing was working. Napoleon arrived and looked at the situation. He studied it carefully. He saw what others could not see. "We are attacking the wrong place," he said. "We need to take that hill over there. If we decontrol that hill, we control the harbor. If we control the harbor, the British ships must leave. And without the British ships, the city will fall." The generals listened. They were not sure, but they had no better plan. They gave Napoleon command of the artillery, the cannons. Napoleon worked day and night. He moved his cannons to the right positions. He planned every detail. He was always at the front, always in danger. One day, a cannon operator was killed right next to him. Napoleon picked up the man's tools and continued firing himself. On December 18, 1793, Toulon fell. The British ships sailed away. The French victory was complete. Napoleon was 24 years old. And suddenly, everyone in France knew his name. He was promoted quickly. He became a general. But life was not easy. The French Revolution was violent and unpredictable. Leaders rose and fell quickly. Napoleon himself was arrested briefly because of his connections to some powerful men who lost favor. He was released, but he had no command. He was in Paris. He was 25 years old. He had no money. He was often hungry. He walked the streets of Paris, wondering what would happen to him next. He visited a cafe one day. He sat alone with a cup of coffee. He watched the people around him. Rich people, poor people, happy people, sad people. He thought about his life, about Corsica, about school, about Toulon. He thought about what he wanted. He took out a small notebook. He wrote down his thoughts. He wrote about his plans. He wrote about the future he imagined. A future where he would lead France, where he would change Europe, where his name would be remembered forever. People around him saw a quiet young man with tired eyes. They did not see what he was writing. They did not see the fire inside him. They did not know that this small unknown soldier was about to become the most powerful man in the world. The opportunity came from an unexpected place. The government of France, called the Directory, was having trouble. There were riots in Paris. Angry mobs were in the streets. They threatened to take over the government buildings. Someone said, "We need a general who is not afraid. Someone who will stop these riots quickly." A friend of Napoleon spoke up. "I know exactly the right man." Napoleon was called. He arrived at the scene. He looked at the angry crowd. He looked at his small group of soldiers. He made a decision in seconds. He ordered his cannons to be brought out. He did not fire at the people. He simply placed the cannons where the crowd could see them. Then he walked forward, alone, into the crowd. "Go home," he said calmly. "This is over." The crowd looked at this small general, so calm, so certain, so completely unafraid. Slowly they backed away. The riot ended. The government was saved. The directors of France looked at Napoleon differently after that day, and Napoleon looked at them differently too. He saw men who were weak, men who were afraid, men who were not capable of leading France to greatness. He began to think of a bigger plan. But first, he needed more glory. He needed more victories. He asked for command of the French army in Italy. Italy at that time was controlled by Austria. France had been trying to defeat Austria for years without success. The Italian army was tired. The soldiers had no food, no shoes, no hope. Napoleon arrived. He looked at his soldiers. They were thin, they were dirty, they were discouraged. He stood before them and he spoke from his heart. "Soldiers, You are hungry and almost naked. The government owes you a great deal but can give you nothing. Your patience, your courage, do you honor but give you no advantage, no glory. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. There you will find honor, glory, and riches. The soldiers listened. Something changed in their eyes. This small general spoke with a power they had never heard before. They believed him. They picked up their weapons. They were ready. And Napoleon delivered on every promise. He moved his army fast, faster than anyone thought possible. He attacked the Austrian forces before they could organize. He won battle after battle. Montenot, Millesimo, Dago, Mondovi, victory after victory after victory. In just 2 weeks, he had broken the power of Austria in northern Italy. He crossed the famous bridge at Arcola under enemy fire. He carried a flag himself, leading his soldiers forward when they hesitated. He was shot at. He was nearly captured. He fell into a marsh. His soldiers pulled him out, and still he continued. He was 27 years old and he was unstoppable. He wrote letters to Josephine every single day. Josephine was the woman he loved. He had met her in Paris. She was beautiful and charming, and Napoleon was completely in love with her. I wake up thinking of you. I sleep thinking of you. I am walking through Italy, but my heart is in Paris with you. But Josephine's letters back were few. She was busy with her life in Paris. She did not feel the same fire that Napoleon felt. It hurt him deeply. But he kept writing. He kept loving her. He could conquer armies, but he could not conquer the heart of Josephine. When the Italian campaign ended, Napoleon returned to France a hero. The people of Paris cheered for him in the streets. He was the man who had done what others could not do. He was a legend, but Napoleon was not finished. He had a new idea, a bold idea. He wanted to go to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because Egypt was connected to the East, and through the East, France could threaten British trade routes to India. Napoleon always thought of the bigger picture. He was not just a soldier, he was a strategist, he was a thinker. He sailed to Egypt with his army and with something unusual. He brought scientists, artists, scholars. He wanted to learn about ancient Egypt. He wanted to understand this land. He told his soldiers, remember that from the height of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you. The words inspired them, and they won great victories in Egypt. But things did not go perfectly. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson found the French fleet anchored in Aboukir Bay. Nelson attacked and destroyed almost the entire French fleet. Napoleon and his army were now trapped in Egypt. They could not go home. Napoleon did not panic. He continued his campaigns. He marched into Syria. He battled disease and heat and a stubborn enemy. He lost soldiers, he lost battles. He faced moments of real darkness. He stood one night at the edge of a camp in the desert. The sky above him was full of stars. He looked up at them for a long time. A young soldier walked past and saw the general standing alone. General Bonaparte, the soldier said quietly, are you all right? Napoleon turned and looked at the young man. For a moment, the great general looked like a tired young man from Corsica, a boy far from home. I am thinking, Napoleon said. Every great leader must know how to survive failure. Failure is not the end, it is a lesson. Remember that. The young soldier nodded. He never forgot those words. Eventually, Napoleon received news from France. The government there was failing. France was in danger. He made the most important decision of his life. He left his army in Egypt under another commander. He secretly boarded a ship and sailed back to France. It was a risky move. He could have been caught. He could have been court-martialed for abandoning his army. But Napoleon calculated everything. He arrived in France and the people welcomed him with joy. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon walked into the government buildings with his loyal soldiers. The weak directors could not stop him. Within hours, the old government was gone. Napoleon was now the first consul of France. He was the most powerful man in the country. He was 30 years old. Many people expected Napoleon to become just another selfish ruler, someone who would take power and use it only for himself. But Napoleon surprised everyone. He worked incredibly hard for France. He reformed the legal system. He created the Napoleonic Code. This was a new set of laws based on equality and fairness. Rich and poor were equal before the law. People could own property. Religion was a personal choice. These were revolutionary ideas for that time. My real glory is not the 40 battles I won, Napoleon once said. My real glory is the Napoleonic Code that will live forever. He reformed the schools. He reformed the banks. He reformed the roads and the government offices. He worked 18 hours a day. He slept very little. He drove everyone around him hard because he himself worked so hard. He married Josephine in a grand ceremony. He was madly in love with her. He wanted to share his success with her. He gave her beautiful clothes, jewels, and a magnificent palace. But Josephine remained distant. She was fond of Napoleon, but she never loved him the way he loved her. This was Napoleon's great personal wound. He could defeat armies, he could change laws, he could reshape Europe, but he could not make Josephine love him completely. It was the one battle he never fully won. On December 2, 1804, Napoleon made his greatest symbolic moment. In the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, Napoleon was to be crowned Emperor of France. The Pope himself came from Rome for the ceremony. This was extraordinary. Popes did not travel to crown leaders. Leaders traveled to Rome. But Napoleon had reversed even this tradition. The moment came. The Pope reached for the crown, but Napoleon took it from him. He placed it on his own head himself. It was a powerful message to the whole world. He had not received power from the church or from a king. He had taken it himself. He had earned it himself. He then turned to Josephine and gently placed a crown on her head. For a moment, he looked at her with such tenderness. In that moment, beneath all the glory and the power, he was just a man in love. The crowd roared. France had an emperor. Europe trembled. The kings and queens of Europe looked at Napoleon with fear and anger. He was not one of them. He was not born into royalty. He was a common man who had risen to rule. This frightened them. If one man could do this, then any man could do this. Their own people might get ideas. They formed coalitions, groups of countries working together to stop Napoleon. Austria, Prussia, Russia, England. They attacked France again and again. Napoleon defeated them again and again. At the Battle of Austerlitz in December 1805, Napoleon faced the combined armies of Austria and Russia. This was considered his greatest military victory. He was outnumbered. But he had a plan. He pretended to be weak on his right side. The enemy commanders saw this. They moved their forces to attack his weak right side. This is exactly what Napoleon wanted. He then struck the center of their army with everything he had. He split their forces in two, and then he destroyed both halves. The battle lasted less than 9 hours. The result was total French victory. Two emperors who had come to defeat Napoleon rode away in defeat. Napoleon stood on a hill and watched the sun rise over the battlefield. His generals gathered around him. There was a moment of silence. Then one general said softly, "The son of Austerlitz." Napoleon nodded. This was perhaps the finest day of my life. He went on to win more great battles. Jena, Eylau, Friedland. He defeated Prussia. He made peace with Russia. He placed his brothers on the thrones of different European countries. He controlled more of Europe than any man since the Roman Empire. He built roads and canals. He established the Bank of France. He promoted talented people regardless of their birth. A farmer's son could become a general in Napoleon's army. A poor boy could become a minister. It was the birth of a new kind of society. But with all his success, Napoleon had a deep longing. He wanted children. He wanted a son to carry on after him. And Josephine had not given him a child. It was the source of great pain for both of them. Napoleon made the hardest personal decision of his life. He divorced Josephine. It was not a decision made in anger, it was made in sadness. He loved her still. He would always love her. But he needed an heir. When he told her, they both wept. He held her hands and said, I will always consider you my true wife. But France needs an heir, and I cannot ask France to wait. Josephine nodded through her tears. She understood. She had always known this day might come. Napoleon married Marie Louise of Austria. She gave him a son. He named the boy Napoleon, the King of Rome. When the baby was placed in Napoleon's arms for the first time, this great conqueror, this emperor of Europe, wept openly. I have won many battles, he whispered, but nothing compares to this. For a brief time, Napoleon had everything: power, empire, a son, peace with most of Europe. He stood at the absolute peak of human achievement. But pride can blind even the greatest minds. Napoleon made his greatest mistake in 1812. He decided to invade Russia. Russia was huge. The Russian winter was deadly. His advisors warned him. His generals warned him. Even history warned him. No one had ever conquered Russia, but Napoleon believed in his own greatness too much. He gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen. 600,000 soldiers from France and across his empire. He called it the Grande Army, the Great Army. He marched into Russia in June 1812. The Russian army retreated before him. They did not fight. They burned their own crops. They burned their own towns. They left nothing for the French soldiers to eat or use. Napoleon kept advancing. He reached Moscow in September. He expected the Russians to surrender, but they did not. Instead, the Russians burned Moscow themselves. The city was in flames. Napoleon stood outside the burning city and could not believe what he saw. He waited in the ruins of Moscow for weeks. He waited for the Russian Tsar to come and make peace, but no one came. The cold began to arrive. October, November. The temperature dropped below freezing. Napoleon ordered the retreat, and the retreat from Moscow became one of the greatest disasters in military history. The temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees. The soldiers had no warm clothing. They had no food. The Russian forces attacked them constantly as they marched back. Men fell in the snow and never got up. Horses died by the thousands. Soldiers froze to death at night. 600,000 soldiers marched into Russia. Less than 100,000 came back alive. Napoleon rode among his men. He saw their suffering. He had caused it. He knew it. And it broke something inside him. For the first time, the great Napoleon was truly broken. He returned to Paris. The news of the disaster had arrived before him. People looked at him differently now. The enemy kings of Europe saw their chance. They formed a new coalition: Austria, Prussia, Russia, England, Sweden. All together now, Napoleon fought back. He raised new armies. Young boys went to war. Napoleon fought brilliantly even now. He won battles with tired, inexperienced troops that amazed his enemies. But there were too many enemies, coming from too many directions. In October 1813, at the massive Battle of Leipzig in Germany, Napoleon was defeated. It was the largest battle in European history up to that point. 4 days of fighting. 300,000 soldiers on each side. The result was French defeat. Napoleon retreated to France. The enemy armies followed. They marched toward Paris. Napoleon refused to surrender. He fought on the roads of France itself. He won small victories. But Paris fell while he was fighting elsewhere. His marshals, his generals, his closest companions came to him. They told him the truth. It was over. You must abdicate, they said. You must give up power. France cannot take any more war. Napoleon sat quietly for a long time. He thought of Toulon, of Italy, of Austerlitz, of everything he had built, of France, of his people, of his son. He thought of all of it, then he said quietly, I know. He signed the abdication papers. He gave up his throne. The great emperor of France was finished. He was sent into exile on the island of Elba, a small island off the coast of Italy. He was 44 years old, and his word was gone. On Elba, Napoleon was given a small court to rule. Soldiers who remained loyal, a tiny palace. He walked on the beach in the mornings. He organized the island's small government. He corresponded with allies. He read newspapers. He waited. People thought he was finished. The kings of Europe relaxed. They began their great Congress of Vienna, where they planned to redraw the map of Europe and undo everything Napoleon had built. But Napoleon was listening, and he was learning. He heard that the new French king was unpopular, that the people of France missed him, that his old soldiers wanted him back, that the country was in trouble. On February 26, 1815, Napoleon did something astonishing. He escaped from Elba with about 1,000 soldiers. He boarded ships. He sailed back to France. He landed on the southern coast. The French king sent a regiment of soldiers to arrest him. Napoleon walked toward the soldiers alone. He walked with no weapon. He opened his coat and said, Soldiers, it is I, your emperor. If any of you wishes to shoot his emperor, here I am. There was a long silence. Then one soldier threw down his rifle. Another did the same, then another. Then they all began to cheer. Vive l'empereur! Long live the emperor! The regiment joined him. And as Napoleon marched north toward Paris, every army sent to stop him joined him instead. He walked into Paris without firing a single shot. The king fled, and Napoleon was emperor again. This period is called the 100 Days, but the kings of Europe immediately united against him again. Napoleon knew he had to act fast. He marched his army into Belgium to attack before the full coalition could assemble. On June 18, 1815, he faced the British army under the Duke of Wellington at a place called Waterloo. The battle began well. Napoleon pushed the British back. Wellington's army was under enormous pressure, but Napoleon waited too long at a critical moment, and late in the afternoon the Prussian army arrived to help the British. Suddenly Napoleon was surrounded. His army broke. It ran. It was complete defeat. Napoleon stood on a hill and watched his army collapse. The man who had won more than 60 major battles stood and watched his last battle lost. He was captured. This time, the British sent him as far away as possible, to the island of St. Helena, a small, remote, rocky island in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of miles from France, thousands of miles from Europe, as far from power as you could get. Napoleon arrived on St. Helena in October 1815. He was 45 years old. He would never leave. The island was damp and cold. The house they gave him was uncomfortable. The British governor of the island watched him constantly. He was not free. He was a prisoner, a former emperor living as a prisoner on a forgotten island. Many men would have broken completely. Many would have given up. Many would have spent their days in bitterness and regret. Napoleon chose something different. He chose to write. He dictated his memoirs. He told his stories to loyal companions who had chosen to follow him into exile. He explained his decisions, he described his battles, he shared his philosophies. His words were written down, and those words would eventually travel across the world. He sat by candlelight in the evenings and talked for hours. He remembered everything: the smell of Corsica, the cold schoolrooms in France, the sound of cannon fire at Toulon, the faces of his soldiers in Italy, the great sunrise at Austerlitz, the burning sky above Moscow, the roar of the crowd when he placed the crown on his own head. He talked about leadership, about courage, about the nature of power, about what makes a great nation, about equality, about opportunity, about why ordinary people deserved to live extraordinary lives. The people must have access to education, he said one evening. A nation that does not educate its children has no future. He talked about his mistakes too. He was honest about Russia, about pride, about the moments where he had stopped listening to wise counsel. I became too confident, he said. I forgot that even the greatest plan depends on the cooperation of nature, of chance, and of the enemy. I forgot to be humble. He also spoke of personal things, of Josephine, of how he still thought of her, of how she had died in 1814, shortly after his first exile to Elba. He had not been there. He had not been able to say goodbye. When he heard the news of her death, he had locked himself in his room for 2 days and refused to see anyone. On St. Helena, he still kept a portrait of her. She was the greatest joy of my personal life, he said softly one night, and perhaps my greatest grief. But I do not regret loving her. Love is never a mistake. He also spoke of his son, his little king of Rome, the boy who was now living in Austria, far from France, being raised as a simple Austrian duke, forbidden from any French connection. Napoleon never saw his son again after leaving Paris in 1814. He kept a small wax miniature of the boy nearby at all times. He looked at it often. He hoped the boy was happy. He hoped the boy would one day read his words and understand. Tell him, Napoleon said to one of his companions, that I loved France and I loved him more than anything. Tell him that the only true inheritance I leave him is my name and my example. Tell him that he must earn his own greatness, just as I did. The years passed slowly on St. Helena. Napoleon's health declined. The dampness of the island affected him. He became thinner, he grew weaker, but his mind remained sharp, his voice remained strong, and his spirit remained unbroken. In April 1821, Napoleon felt that his end was near. He called his faithful companions around him. He made his last will. He thought of everyone who had served him. He remembered names of ordinary soldiers who had shown extraordinary courage. He tried to provide for their families. He thought about his legacy, not just the battles, not just the laws, but the idea that had driven his whole life. The idea that any person, no matter where they were born, could rise to become something remarkable through intelligence, hard work, and courage. On the morning of May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died on St. Helena. He was 51 years old. His last words, spoken very softly, were reported to be France, Army, Josephine, three things that had defined his entire life. He was buried on St. Helena. But in 1840, nearly 20 years after his death, France brought his remains back to Paris. The city lined the streets with hundreds of thousands of people who came to see the funeral procession. Men who had fought with him, women who had watched him, children who had only heard stories. All of them came. They came to honor a man who had come from nothing, who had been teased and mocked and underestimated, who had fallen so many times, who had lost so much, but who had also given so much, who had changed the shape of the world. Napoleon was placed in a magnificent tomb at Les Invalides in Paris. He is still there today, and the laws he wrote, the reforms he created, the values he championed still live in the legal systems of dozens of countries around the world. But more than the battles and the laws and the empire, Napoleon's greatest legacy is an idea that still inspires people 200 years later, the idea that your beginning does not determine your end. The boy from Corsica who was mocked for his accent, the student who had no money and no connections, the young officer who was overlooked and arrested and forgotten. He became the emperor of Europe, not because of luck, not because of family, not because of the right connections or the right birth, because he believed, he studied, he worked, he got back up every time he fell, he learned from every failure, he refused to let the world define him. He defined himself. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the times you felt small, the times someone laughed at you, the times you failed and felt like giving up, the times the world told you that you were not good enough. Napoleon would look at you and say something simple. He would say, rise. He knew what it felt like to be small. He knew what it felt like to be the outsider. He knew what it felt like to lose everything and start again. He did it multiple times. He was not a perfect man. He made terrible mistakes. He caused great suffering through his wars. He was too proud at times. He pushed too far. He should have stopped. He should have listened more. These are real failures, and they had real consequences for millions of people. But within those failures are lessons that every person can learn. Pride destroys what patience built. Listening to wise counsel is strength, not weakness. Knowing when to stop is as important as knowing when to push forward. The most dangerous moment for a leader is at the height of success, when he stops being humble. Napoleon himself understood this at the end. On St. Helena, without an empire, without an army, without power of any kind, he was perhaps more honest and more wise than he had ever been. He sat in a small room on a faraway island and he wrote truths that still echo. He wrote about leadership. A leader is a dealer in hope. That was his belief. He motivated his soldiers not with fear but with hope, with belief, with the feeling that what they were doing together was extraordinary. He wrote about education. The greatest victory is the conquest of ignorance. He believed that educated people could solve any problem. That knowledge was the foundation of everything. He wrote about resilience. Impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools. This famous thought captures the fire that drove his whole life. The refusal to accept limits that other people placed on him. And perhaps most personally, he wrote about the nature of greatness itself. Impossible is not a fact, it is an opinion, it is a dare. He had dared his entire life. He had dared to leave Corsica. He had dared to speak in a foreign language. He had dared to lead when others hesitated. He had dared to take the crown from the Pope's own hands. He had dared to escape from Elba and walk alone toward armed soldiers and open his coat. And even at the end, he had dared to use his remaining years to write and to teach and to pass on the fire that burned in him. That fire has never gone out. Students have read his words in universities around the world. Military leaders have studied his campaigns for 2 centuries. Lawyers and judges have applied the principles of his legal code. Teachers have used his ideas about education. Business leaders have studied his management style. Ordinary people have found courage in his story. A small boy from a poor family on a forgotten island, who was teased and mocked and arrested and defeated and exiled and defeated again. Who kept going anyway? That is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, and it is in many ways The story of every human being who has ever dared to dream of something greater than their circumstances, who has ever looked up at the stars from a cold desert camp and decided that tomorrow would be better, who has ever picked up their broken pieces and rebuilt something stronger. You may not want an empire, you may not want to command armies, but you have your own battles to fight, your own ambitions to pursue, your own voice to raise, your own life to build. And somewhere in the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, there is a truth for you. A moment that speaks to your own struggle. A lesson that applies to your own journey. The boy who was mocked for his accent became the most eloquent voice of his age. The small soldier who was overlooked became the greatest military mind of his century. The prisoner on a forgotten island became one of the most studied figures in all of human history. He did not do it by being lucky. He did not do it by being born into power. He did it by deciding every single morning that he was not finished yet, and neither are you. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte ends on a cold island in the middle of the ocean, but the lessons of his life never end. They travel, they cross oceans and centuries. They find people who need them, people who are struggling, people who are afraid, people who have fallen and are wondering if they can get back up. And to all of those people, Napoleon's life whispers the same thing it has always whispered: rise. Keep going. You are not done yet. The world is waiting to see what you will do next. And so is history. Moral of the story: your origin does not determine your destiny. No matter how small your beginning, how many times you fail, or how many people doubt you, the only thing that truly limits you is the moment you choose to stop believing in yourself. Rise after every fall, learn from every mistake, work harder than anyone around you, and dare to dream bigger than the world thinks is possible. Greatness is not given, it is earned one hard day at a time.